Okay, here we are. I believe we have officially gone live. Marjorie Knight, I don't know. I've pressed all sorts of buttons and done all sorts of things. So I'm hoping that it's actually live somewhere. So, we'll see what happens.
Yep, we
Um,
will.
we'll be able to see comments and stuff. Yeah, it's showing me that it's live. So that's kind of cool. Welcome, everyone, to the Eraser Institute. For those that have actually signed up to be part of this fun and action oriented networking space. I don't even know. I'm making up all the words right now just because. You can actually sign up anytime. Look, Sin. Look, people see us. Yay! Hooray! Okay, so that is lovely. Thank you for understanding that assistant needed to make sure that folks could see the things. But yes, if you have signed up, there is like a networking space that you can be in, which is super cool. We have close to actually just above 70 people, I think, are signed up in our little workspace, our activist workspace, to talk about how to do anti racist work, which is super, super cool. We're still learning the platform. And so I'll keep throwing some questions out there in that little space, and people will be able to get to know each other as we do that. We are going live today as our very first Real Talk, Real Walk live stream. So, for those that have gone through the free membership, this is part of what's going to happen. We're going to have conversations with super cool people like the one, the only Marjorie Knight, who is with us today. Woo, Marjorie! Which is super cool. Mhm. We are definitely, definitely going to have some conversations. The focus of our conversations, my friends, is on the action piece. And so I'm going to pull it all back. When you go live in this platform, you kind of have to chit chat to see what's happening. But we're going to go live, or sorry, we are live now. And so I'm going to pull it all back and we're going to do this. We're going to start well. And that for me is with a land acknowledgement. So here I am hosting this live session for the Eraser Institute, the very first time that we're going live for the Real Talk, Real Walk network. And I'm hosting this from my home in Kitchener, which has been held down, cared for, loved, and stewarded by the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Neutral people. We are on the Haldeman Tract, and as many people have heard me say in the past, and I will say it again, finding out the land that you're on is the easy peasy part. You can Google that. And in fact, if you go to the Eraser Institute website and you look to your right, I think it is, there's actually a button that you can press to find out exactly what land you're on. It links you to the Know Your Land or Know the Land website. And you can find out exactly what treaties are there, all of that kind of important stuff. But I was once upon a time in a different role and was told that your land acknowledgement can be a very powerful tool towards reconciliation if it is used in a meaningful way. And one way to make it meaningful is to make a direct connection between the topic of the conversation you're about to have and the reality that you're having said conversation on stolen land. And so for me, my land acknowledgement always veers into something slightly different every time I say it because the topic of my conversation or even the angle of the conversation I'm about to have is shifting. And so today, I am joined by Marjorie Knight to jumpstart the public discussion around doing anti-racist work. And so for me, the concrete connection is quite simple, and yet not, but simple in that it's about action. It's about the fact that even when the Truth and Reconciliation Commission put out the calls to action, those calls to actions, typically when you do a big report like that and give it to government, you have, you might say next steps or promising practices or something like that, but not necessarily action. But after hearing and holding so many stories of the trauma that ensued from the realities of residential schools, the only thing that could be asked of everybody was action. And so I remember actually when I was still working at the university before I was elected, there were discussions about reconciliation, that language, and how many of us were doing reconciliation very superficially by saying things like, yeah, we're very committed to Indigenous communities and we're very committed to Indigenous sovereignty, but not willing to act to show and that commitment in action to actually make the change. And so then there were discussions about reconciliation as opposed to reconciliation, where you're just talking, 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 as opposed to acting, acting, acting. And so I'm starting there because the purpose of the Eraser Institute, the purpose of bringing us together, is firmly planted in a space for action. And so, what I hope to do in a variety of ways is to demonstrate to people, show them what doing anti racist work looks like. And I'm going to go through my own networks and I'm going to ask people that I know that are doing this work day in, day out, to talk to me about what this actually looks like. Now, for the Real Talk, Real Walk group, this free membership is it's action oriented, but it's also sort of preliminary. I'm helping you to the best of my ability by introducing you to various examples of what doing anti racist work looks like. For this particular month, we're focused on Indigenous communities and some of the action that has happened within those communities with a particular aim to figure out how we can mobilize our own spheres of influence to support the cause. So it's not just about watch the video and then sit like we were doing with the Real Talk book club once upon a time, but it's about trying to figure out who do you know in your particular sphere of influence, because we always know people that can make change. So who do you know that you could talk to about some of this new learning that you're doing, and what could you ask of them to be part of the actual movement of reconciliation? And what that also means, and the reason why I had actually reached out to Marjorie to have this conversation with me today, is that um, two things that you have to sort of always keep in mind. Racism appears differently for different groups. What it looks like shifts because of the group that racism is being directed towards. The sector will make a difference on how it appears, and the world around you, the social context, will shift how overt racism appears or how covert it appears, how normalized it is in your systems or how explicit it becomes in your systems. What that also means, and that second thing that I want folks to always hold on to, is that non white folks also can find ways to plug in to help other racialized groups to thrive. And it's important for us to hold that reality because the bigger, broader system doesn't want us to do this work. So instead, they want us to think, I'm Black, I can only fight for the cause for Black folks. I'm Indigenous, I can only fight for the cause for my Indigenous community. I'm whatever, I can only fight for myself. No, that's what the system wants you to do to make it so that we never make change, so that we fight amongst ourselves about whose attention or who's going to get the attention today to try and do this work. I'm of the opinion that we can all use our positions of privilege, use our spheres of influence, and all work towards ensuring Indigenous sovereignty becomes a real live thing on this land, at the same time that we're fighting against anti Black racism, and at the same time that we're paying attention to something, for instance, that just happened yesterday. And then I'm going to ask Marjorie to say a little intro and all of that kind of stuff. But um, in light of the fact that a lot of this work, all of this work really, happens within a social context that is always shifting, it's important for us to take a step back when we make a plan about what it is that we're going to talk about and pay attention to what's happening in the world. In Kitchener, at a drive test center,
One of us is frozen, but I'm still here. So, yesterday at the test drive center in Kitchener, a young lady, shall we say, approached the desk and was told to join the line and have a seat and wait. And her reaction to that was to make some derogatory comments, very derogatory comments. And she was called out on it. And her reaction to that was, understandably, was very rude. And it quickly escalated to a physical interaction. And I'm sure it was very shocking to people. There were a lot of people who were watching, look a side eye at what is going on. Some people were filming. But I think that they were all shocked when this person physically attacked this lady. And I have to tell you that a couple of weeks ago, I was in a room talking with this lady. She was explaining to us this program that they are doing, how they are encouraging people to report incidents of hate to the police and walking with them through this journey, which is often really fraught with all kinds of things, to report this kind of action. And now here is she herself, the recipient of something like this. And a lot of people are shocked. I'm not sure why, but a lot of people are shocked that this happened. And I think for the first time, a lot of people have seen it in action here. It's not just something you read about that happens in the States. It's something that happened here. And my friends, it happens more than you think. So,
absolutely.
There we are.
Thank you, Marjorie, for jumping in there. I don't know what's going on with my interweb. My internet's doing its own thing, but whatever. You go with it. So this particular month, our focus was on, we looked at a video about it was about a speech that was delivered by Senator Murray Sinclair. And it was a very powerful video. If you go to the Eraser Institute, you sign up there, you can actually get the link to it. It's an NFB film. And what I had asked of people, I asked them some guiding questions and such, but essentially the questions that I'm asking people to consider are quite simple. One is to pay attention to that social context. So what's happening around you with Indigenous communities? What are they asking for? What are the needs that they are presenting? So for example, in my particular neck of the woods, there is a need for an Indigenous hub. There have been Indigenous community members who have been asking for vacant areas within the city to become an Indigenous hub that provides mental health supports and recreational type things and just all the supports that folks need in one space in the downtown core in Kitchener. And part of why they're asking for that is because there are insufficient spaces where urban Indigenous community members can access what they need. And a lot of that goes back to stereotypes about where we think Indigenous folks are and where we don't believe they exist. They exist right downtown in urban areas and they need access to stuff. And so that's one of the asks that I know is a concrete ask that people have been trying to mobilize around. So that's the first piece. The second piece is for me to pay attention to who exists in my own sphere of influence. And so a lot of people, again, believe that your sphere of influence, you have to be an influential person in a public figure to have a sphere of influence. That, my friends, is not true. You just need to be in the world and pay attention to who you hang out with, who you can speak to, who could you call, who could you ask to help with the cause that you are trying to focus on, and then mobilizing, which is the actual action piece. And so I reached out to Marjorie because Marjorie is a person that in all of the time that I have known her has been involved in doing this kind of work actively and consistently. And so I wanted to have a conversation with her around this. And so why don't we just start before we even go into any of the questions? Why don't we just start with your reaction to the film? How did you feel? What did you do once you watched it? Talk to me.
It was so powerful.
Yeah.
It was so simply stated. It gives the real context. It gives the real history. One of the things that is missing, that has always been missing, is that people don't know the context. They don't know the history. They don't know that from way back when agreements were made and people were given um, assurances that certain things would remain. Also, people are not aware of the direct action taken by the Canadian government to stamp out ingenuity in this country. People don't understand the hard action taken, that every time there was a way to work towards something, they stamped it out. And they stamped it out through legislation, through laws. They made it so that you couldn't hire a lawyer. Imagine, they made a law that said if the Indigenous people didn't like what they had done with the law and the latest iteration, they could not gather and talk about it and make plans to fight back against the government because that was a criminal act. They made gathering, speaking, or complaining against the government a crime. And then they went a step further. Oh, you want to take us to court? So they made a law that any lawyer who took a case from an Indigenous person without permission from the Minister of Indian Affairs, imagine, the person you're going to sue has to give you permission to sue. The lawyer would be disbarred. Do you think any action could be taken on behalf of the Indigenous people? No, they made it so they could not fight back at all. And I'm telling you, I encourage everybody to look at this thing. I have sent the link to several people because it's important that you look at that and that you understand what the real context is of all of this.
Oh, I'm gonna throw the link to the film that we were watching
Yes.
in, so folks can click on it from there. Um, it was so powerful and hard to
Mhm.
watch. Um, and one of the things that kept standing out for me was, what do we now do with this information? Because I'm witnessing, even in our laws today, you're witnessing the same kind of approach
Mhm.
to the use and abuse of one's power, right? Where, okay, well, I don't want this group to talk, so I'm going to legislate it so that you can't. Because, and by doing that, you are impacting huge amounts of communities, but you're also, it's a ripple that happens for literally generations of survivors who, even once you change the law, um, don't, there's no space for them to be able to explain the impact of that law having existed in the first place.
But but part of it, it comes back to the whole trauma porn thing.
Hmm.
And the reconciliation almost became trauma porn. Because here are these people pouring their trauma out to us.
Yeah.
And everybody is clutching their pearls and, all of this thing. And I mean, there's no way you cannot be affected by it. But we come to the crux of the matter. After we've clutched our pearls and, stood in solidarity, then what? We have
Yeah.
done nothing. just look what's going on now in the north, in the Ring of Fire.
Mm-hmm.
Now they want to go and mine some more up there. And there is a group of indigenous peoples who do not want this to be done. And so they have just cut them out. Well, these ones want it. These ones don't want it. We don't want to talk to them. But who is going to have to live with it? Look at
Mm-hmm.
Grassy Narrows, lead poisoning from mining and activities. How long? More than 20 years it has been poisoned and nothing has been done. What happens when they go up there into those areas that are pristine at this point and destroyed? What happens to the people there? Well, why did they choose to live? It's always somebody else's fault. Somebody else's did the wrong thing, wrong decisions, didn't do. The bottom line is, for my gain, I'm going to go and do that. And I really don't care what the people who have stewarded that land for centuries, millennia, we don't care what they're saying to us. So, I mean, how much has changed? Where's the action? Where's the reconciliation? Well, there's some reconciliation, but no reconciliation. Nothing.
Well, and so one of the things that I've also been trying to navigate, and especially just because of the kind of work I do and the kinds of things that I talk about in public, people feel you're overwhelmed once you find out that this is our history, right? So for those that are just finding out the extent. So some of us know that residential schools existed. They didn't necessarily understand the extent of the trauma and the violence and the pain associated with these legislated schools. That's what they called them, right? And so as you enter into this work and you start to find out the realities of this, you feel overwhelmed. But you, Marjorie, are somebody who and I would argue the reason why I love you is because you are somebody who takes that big, hard information and try and find ways to actually use it to do some of the work that you're doing on the ground. So can you tell us, in your particular social context, with the kind of work that you're doing, how have you taken the reality of that history and tried to turn that into more than just witnessing of it, but instead action on the ground to try and do this anti-racist work?
I think a lot of it comes down to listening. It's one thing to know a big picture.
Yep.
But the thing is that to do work, you have to know what they need.
Yeah.
And I, it's not something we're going to do to them, right?
Yep.
It's not even something we're going to do for them.
Yeah.
It's something we're going to be doing with them. So, for instance, I sat with a family. They're indigenous. They live in Cambridge. And, I had a long talk with mom. She has a 7-8-year-old who has had no contact really with her indigenous history, her heritage. There was a residential school in their family, both sides of their family. So mom has received the same traumas basically from her parents, and they are alone. So we had a long conversation, and I said, yeah, I have a friend, and I said, I would love if you would give me permission to talk to her about your situation and see how we can make connections so that your daughter and you can claim your heritage, can learn, can, whatever it is that you need. And she did. And I spoke to my dear friend, Amy Smoke, who must be so tired of me sometimes. She's like,
shout out to Amy Smoke.
What? But she always points me in the right direction of who I can speak to and who I can bring somebody to, so that they're now connected. And I remember it was really funny because I was talking to one of them, and she said to me, "Oh, you know what? I have something for that little girl." And she gave me this beautiful book
Mm.
that I was able to give her. And she was so excited. I think, although I swear to you, her mother was just as excited to have this book that they could read and touch. And it was about me and my, what I look like and what I can do. Was it a big thing? No, it was not a big thing, but it's a big thing
Yeah.
to get connected back to your heritage.
Yeah.
But it wasn't a big thing for me to do. And it wasn't that I had any wonderful spheres of influence, but I knew somebody who
Yeah.
could point me in the right direction.
Yeah.
And doing that. And then, on the other side of things, when you talk about us supporting one another from our different groups, I have a little grassroots operation called Rhythm and Blues Cambridge. And we spent the last 7 weeks in a elementary school in Cambridge. And for 7 weeks, the racialized kids would come and we would have all kinds of things, learning about ourselves, where we came from, the language that we're speaking, the food that we eat, how we do our hair, what it means, what's the history of our hair. There's some really neat things there. But one of the things that we did was to talk about Indigenous peoples in Canada.
Yeah.
And we read a book about water and the impact of not having clean water in so many communities in Canada, and encouraging them to take action. What can you do? And we talked about what would we want to do as a group to help these people get water. Because how would it affect us if it was us? Well, that's not good for them. How can we help? Yeah. The fact that each person can do one thing to make change for somebody else. And I felt it was very important that not just concentrate on us, which we need, mind you, but to remember that the Indigenous peoples of this land are just as, and in some cases more, terrorized and beaten down than we have been. And that the only way we're going to make differences for each other is to hold hands and move forward. And it's important to teach the children this also. So it's not just we're fighting for Black people, we're fighting for people.
Absolutely. And I think the other thing that raises for me is the fact that, again, there's this myth that to do this kind of work, you have to wait for the person in a position of power to make the change, like whatever the change is that you're asking for. So in this particular case, I know that there has been advocacy forever around ensuring that Indigenous curriculum is incorporated into our schools, into education in Ontario. I don't have time to wait for this particular government, or any government for that matter, to decide that they're going to do the right thing. Instead, I can do more than one thing at the same time. So while I fight for that, I can also take the moments where I'm able to be in a position where I can actually provide these texts or provide an article, or that's using your sphere of influence to do the work. And those little small steps that you think are meaningless, taken together with everybody else who is committed to doing the same thing, will actually make the change. And oftentimes you find the legislation happens after. Like, it's in response to all the education that's happened on the ground.
And that's what people need to understand. People need to understand their own power. Because when it comes to politics, they go like this. Which way is the wind blowing? That's the way I will go.
That's what I'm doing. Yep.
If the people rise up, change happens.
Yeah.
Change happens. Because if they want to stay in power, they have to do what they have to do. And they will. And they will.
Oh, they
So,
will.
somebody invites me to come into a class and read a book. Yeah, man, I'm choosing very carefully what book I'm going to bring in there to read.
Yep.
So, in that way, I'm making a difference in those kids. And likewise, if somebody invited my friend Amy into their class and she read the book that I'm sure she would carefully choose also,
Mm-hmm.
that is the influence you need. One person, one child, one group,
Yep.
one
It
group
makes
at
the
a time.
change.
Yeah.
It makes the change. And so we've talked a little bit about the context. So when we think about our social context, we know that a lot of people are still um, uncertain about the realities of Indigenous histories, are still questioning what happened, are finding this like this information is new. Um, the the curriculum does have to change slowly but surely. We're seeing changes happen, but it is slow, right?
Yeah.
We're seeing a call. I think I just want to reiterate for the record something else that Marjorie said about listening, and listening with the intention of acting. So active listening, as opposed to just listening so that you can say you listened,
Mhm.
is critical, because there is a when it comes to anti-racist work, there is a tendency to believe that from whatever vantage point you're in, you know better. You know better, and you can outline all the reasons why you believe that you know better. When at the end of the day, we cannot create a solution to a problem that we've never heard or listened to, right?
Or faced.
Or faced. And so the listening piece and actively listening is super important. Um, the second thing that I often talk to folks about is recognizing and understanding your sphere of influence. I I think it's really important for us to take a moment, because sometimes I say things and there's an assumption that we all do this, right? We say something and we just assume everybody knows what we're talking about. But I think that there is a nuance to stuff, and there are all sorts of ways that we try and dissuade ourselves from acting. And understanding your sphere of influence becomes one of those ways that we dissuade ourselves from acting. We think we don't know the right people. We think that we don't have anybody that can make a change or make decisions in our circle. We don't realize how many tools we have available to us that can actually communicate what we are learning to people that can make change. So can you speak to me just a little bit about that? When I say understanding and recognizing your sphere of influence, what does that mean to you, and what does that look like in the kind of work that you do on the ground?
One thing I can say I recognize all the time is that people don't recognize the greatness in themselves. I will meet somebody and I'll be like, wow, look at this person. Can I mentor this person? Can I get this person to do things? When I was starting Rhythm and Blues, and I know Laura May and I have had this discussion several times, but I invited some of the moms that I work with in my job to come and work with me to form Rhythm and Blues. And they're like, well, okay, but I can't really do much. Well, let me tell you, I sit in awe of these women who have nothing, and the struggle to survive day to day, of looking after their children and themselves and find food for the table and rent. And I listen to the ideas they have had, and I look at them and I said, so what does that really look like? If this is your idea, how can we make it happen? I'm like, make it happen. I want it to happen. How can we make it happen? And they make it happen. February, we had a hair show. It was incredible. Little girls and their parents from all across this region came to learn about their hair, natural curly hair, how to care for it, how to comb it, what to do with it, all those things. Because we have lost that ability. having moved to North America. At home, it was a community thing, and everybody do everybody's hair. And you don't have that hair, but we did it here, and this was done by these same moms with no influence, no sphere, no nothing, and they got and put together the most awesome show ever that impacted so many people.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, sphere of influence, you make your sphere of influence.
Mm-hmm.
Your influence doesn't have to be great. You don't have to be in charge of anything. You just have to say, this is what I want to do. How can I make it happen? And reach out to those around you to make it happen.
Yeah.
I could never in a million years have done that hair show. No way. I know my capabilities, that was not it. But these moms did it. And what they have influenced, and the influence that has grown from them doing that.
Yeah.
Now people are reaching out to them going, listen, hey, can we do this? How can we do that?
So there's two, again, me and these two things that you said that I find striking, that I think it's important for us to reiterate. One is recognizing the power that you have. So again, in anti-racist work and anti-racist organizing, there's a lot of discussion about power. But I think we make an assumption that when we say power, we're only speaking about traditional forms of power, like the power structure, which was created on our backs, as opposed to the power that we all have as living beings in this world. And so sometimes you need the encouragement to recognize that you can, in fact, actively do things to effect change.
Mhm.
And you can do it if you think sort of more smaller and intentional, right? So the word intentionality often comes out for folks that are talking about doing anti-racist work. You find a problem, so you do your active listening, you figure out what it is that you're trying to achieve, you become intentional with your actions, and then that sphere of influence also shows up because we are surrounded by people in various capacities. Some we know, some we don't. Because you don't know somebody doesn't mean you can't write a letter to them or ask them or make a phone call or send them an email. And for the people that you do know, because you know them in this particular capacity does not mean that you can't ask them for help. So then being the second piece for me is the courage. So
Yeah.
once you understand the problem or overstand it, and then you start to become intentional with what it is that you're trying to achieve, you can start to think about, well, who do you know? And before you look around, you will find out that you know a lot of folks.
Mhm.
So I've put, again, the Eraser Institute website up on the screen because there are people within this little network that do know things and know people. And everybody that's joining wants to find a way to become intentional with their power. They want to find a way to plug in and help. So if you happen to have an idea or you've heard a problem, because that's the other thing, as you talk about more stuff and your attention is on it, people will come to you and tell you about their experience. So as you start to recognize that you're being told about the experiences, let's say, of urban Indigenous folks in your particular community, and they've raised something or said it in passing, or you've witnessed something, and you don't quite know what to do with that information, drop me a line in there. There's literally on the homepage, you can put a comment and you can send me an email. And I can help by using my sphere of influence to make connections because I like to network people. I don't have all the answers, but I do know people that do. And I know people whose hearts are in the right place and they want to support each other in doing meaningful work. So that power that you have can come just from the courage of saying, here's the problem that I want to try and address.
Mhm.
Which leads me to the very last thing before we sort of wrap things up, which to me is that it's the most important piece. It's the mobilizing piece. It's being courageous enough to act. And so one of the things that I did try to do for May was I gave everybody, again, you sign up for this free membership, the Real Talk Real Walk membership, and you get access to the members portal. In the May section, when you're watching Honor to Senator Murray Sinclair, there's some questions at the bottom, and one of the questions actually has the link to the TRC, the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action. And so there are tools that are literally sitting right in front of you that can help to make your actions more intentional. Look at the 94, I think it is, calls to action, and pick one that resonates with you and do that work. Like, it can be that simple, that you look at the calls to action. These are things that Indigenous communities across Turtle Island have asked for. And so you know they're legit, and these are things that people need. Look at what it is that you do. Pick the area and then start to do some of that work. So for that reason, my last little, I want us to take a bit of time to talk about this mobilizing piece. And I had, again, when I reached out to you, Marjorie, I had said to you, I've been working in the calls to action under Education for Reconciliation. Calls 62 and 63 have been the ones that I have been drawn to because of the work that I do. The calls under education. I'm going to take a second and read them first so that people that haven't actually read them know. And I'm going to read the like sub things that are inside there. And then I'm going to pass it over to you, because it turns out Marjorie, who's also interested in similar starting points as I am, has also been doing work in that area. So we can talk a little bit about the mobilizing. So call to action 62. We call upon the federal, provincial, and territorial governments, in consultation and collaboration with survivors, Aboriginal peoples, and educators, to 1. Make age-appropriate curriculum on residential schools, treaties, and Aboriginal peoples' historical and contemporary contributions to Canada, a mandatory education requirement for kindergarten to grade 12 students. 2. Provide the necessary funding to post-secondary institutions to educate teachers on how to integrate Indigenous knowledge and teaching methods into classrooms. That piece, I just need to say this out loud, is so important, because even with the right curriculum, if you don't teach people how to teach it, things can go sideways very quickly. And so in order for us to actually do the work asked of us under the 60-second call to action, you have to give the tools to the teachers so that they know how to work with this information that they were never taught, because it doesn't exist in our schools in a meaningful way, or hadn't when they were going through the school system, right? 3, provide the necessary funding to Aboriginal schools to utilize Indigenous knowledge and teaching methods in classrooms. 4, establish senior level positions in government at the assistant deputy minister level or higher, dedicated to Aboriginal content in education. So there's specificity and intentionality in that call. Call to action number 63. We call upon the Council of Ministers of Education Canada to maintain an annual commitment to Aboriginal educational issues, including 1, developing and implementing kindergarten to grade 12 curriculum and learning resources on Aboriginal peoples in Canada and Canadian history and the history and legacy of residential schools. 2, sharing information and best practices on teaching curriculum related to residential schools and Aboriginal history. 3, building student capacity for intercultural understanding, empathy, and mutual respect. And 4, identifying teacher training needs related to the above. And so those two have been the calls to action that I'm most drawn to, and using my sphere of influence to try and create some change or attention or rabble rouse, whatever language I need to use, depending on who I'm working with. Marjorie, talk to me a little bit about what you've been doing, because I know that you've also been interested in those calls to action.
I am very interested, especially when it comes to education. And in this area, I have to say that it's parallel, the Black experience and the Indigenous experience. Neither of our curriculum is in schools. And we've had a lot of lip service to this, but nothing has happened. So I really have been going in the back door of going into schools with some of the curriculum myself.
Yeah.
And working with kids that way. And I know that there are indigenous groups who are doing the same thing. Um, we have to act wherever we are at. There are some days, yes, the rabble rousing, the sign carrying, and the politician baiting goes on, because it's necessary.
Mm-hmm.
I'm never going to say it's not necessary. They have to hear from us. But on a ground level, I am going into schools and we're talking about things on our curriculum, where we came from, how we came. Not only that, but things such as here are our inventors, here are our authors, here are our scientists, here are other people who have done great things who
Yeah.
we never hear about. It's, it's one thing to have a curriculum, and it's one thing to know that we came over in a slave ship. It's
Mm-hmm.
also another thing to know that you were here for millennia, and if it wasn't for you, none of those Europeans would have survived a year in North America. But it's another thing to hear and learn about the greatness of your people.
Mm-hmm.
When you have been taught that you are less than, that you're inferior, that you don't have a brain, that you're only good for sports, you're only good to drink, you're only good to do drugs. What happens when you are presented with the antithesis of this? When you're presented with the greatness that comes from your people?
Mm-hmm.
When that is brought and shown to kids, you should see their reactions. And not just the kids, but big people too. When you're going, what? We did that?
Yep.
Yeah, man, it's a Black person who, designed a super soaker. How many super soakers have been in your life? I know I had many of them. It's a Black person did that. How many Black astronauts and scientists have we known? I mean, the biggest national hero we have in Jamaica is a woman.
Yeah.
Nanny of the Maroons. You must read about her one day. She was very
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
But I mean, we don't hear of these heroes. We don't hear of these people. We don't know about them. What a difference it makes when you know. So
And
yes, we're doing it on two sides.
absolutely. And we don't hear about the moments, the moments in history where our people worked collaboratively.
Yes.
So if you go into the history books for Nova Scotia, the stories abound of Black communities and Indigenous communities
Yes.
on that land that worked together in order to protect each other, protect, just doing work.
There's a huge intersectionality, and not just in Nova Scotia. If you go up James Bay and all those ways, there are so many Black Indigenous people.
Yeah.
There's a huge intersectionality because we protected and worked together all the time.
And the system works by dividing.
Yes.
And so the tool of the state, the tool of the system that is most often used is the one that divides us, because when we are united, we're powerful in their
Divide and
traditional
conquer.
power, right? And so when we are doing this work, so for me, when I'm going to these two calls to action and I'm trying to figure out how it is that I can do things that are in support of that kind of a movement, reminding people of the power of bringing us together is critical. Is there going to be resistance? Absolutely. Because the system that we're in doesn't want to change. It wants to remain as it is. So we've got to be intentional in building our own little community of love and care and support so that we can step forward. When you've got examples of Indigenous community members, you read it in the news, Indigenous community members that are being denied access to healthcare, right? Denied access to housing. And they hear over and over and over and over and over again stereotypical representations of who they are, and are denied the things that they need to thrive for themselves or for their families to thrive. They're tired. And so there's time for us now to step up and start to do the work that they need to heal. And so give people a moment to heal, which leads me to the last little thought that I have before we end up wrapping up our very first live stream. Um, there is a tendency to believe that anti-racist work is work done by non-white communities to protect themselves. There is a myth that we need to just be given space to do the work in public. But we have experienced trauma because of racism. And so sometimes we need other folks to do that work. Now, racism ebbs and flows in all of these different areas. There are loads of kinds of racism. The way that it operates is tricky, and it changes because it wants to keep going. And that's a part of the problem. Recognizing racism as it comes requires you to trust community to tell you, no, that's what racism looks like. That was an example of anti-indigeneity, et cetera, et cetera. Because we recognize the overt examples, but we don't recognize the covert. We don't recognize the moments where all of a sudden dusty old rules that were never used for centuries dusted off and brought up so that an indigenous community member can't access X, right? So as that's happening, every single person is responsible for bringing the change, which means part of the job in becoming intentional is to figure out what your role is within this broader movement. And so the reason I wanted to throw that into the mix is because I do not want this to become a space where people think only Black, Indigenous, non-white folks are to be doing this work. There is no place for me. No, there's work for all of us to do. There is a system that needs to shift. And there are people that every single person can influence. There are people I can talk to that you might not be able to talk to, but there's people you can talk to that I can't talk to. There's people that you know that I don't know that might be able to make a change in some big ways and some small ways. And so I just want us all to find our space. So, with that being the case, the website is there for anybody that wants to join us in this journey. These live streams are going to be monthly, where we're going to sit down and talk about various things. The June information is going to go up. I might actually put it up a little bit early so that people can start to watch the movie that we'll be watching in June as well. There are opportunities for you to participate in having conversations with other people that are trying to do anti-racist work in this world. And I want us to connect, and I want us to have a space. One of the things that I've often heard as well is that people that do anti-racist work feel isolated while doing that work. And that feeling of isolation stops them from engaging in that work. And so my hope is that we can create a space where the isolation is decreased, the work and the action is increased, the networking is increased, and the love that we put into the universe is increased. Marjorie, thank you for being amazing and for joining me today.
Thanks for having me. This is a great conversation because we need everybody. There are places I can go that you can't go. And there are places that you can go that I cannot go. Mm-hmm. But if we all go to these places, we will make a difference.
Ashe, yes, we will. And so on that note, I'm going to end because it's how I roll. I'm going to end with something hilarious to me. Oh, wait, I forgot to say this out loud. If you sign up for any of the memberships, so go to the website and you sign up, the free memberships there. There's another paid membership that's there as well. But that paid membership is for folks that are ready to get this institute off the ground. That's a whole other thing. But if you go, there will be a surprise coming your way. It involves music because it's the music that I listen to. I don't know if you've got to listen to it, but I put together a little bit of a playlist of the music that I listen to that gets me moving to do the work, because the work is hard. So you've got to listen to music. But now on that note, I just wanted to do this because my son, who is only the tender age of 8, created this. So this will be the playlist that this song is going to sign us out. I call it Jaden's Vibes. Are you folks ready?
Ready.
Yeah? Okay, here it comes, baby. Here it comes. That's right.
Jaden.
He's pretty hype, eh? Doesn't that make you want to run out and get all intentional? Come on now. Okay, my friends, listen. I thank you. I think it's
fantastic. I just have one little thing to say.
Bring it.
On the 1st of August,
August 1st,
between 3 to 7, we're having an Emancipation Day street dance in Cambridge. Ooh. Right in front of the City Hall. We're closing down the street. We're going to have a history corner. We're going to have a wisdom bench. Come with your questions. Come to talk. Come to eat, dance, do limbo, and have a good time.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Okay. Marjorie, send me the details and I'll post it in our little network as well so that folks have it. Please do me a solid. Sign up and join us and be a regular participant in these conversations and most importantly, in the action that comes after it. Yes. We can make the difference. Don't let the haters, let them do whatever they're going to do, whatever. Let's focus on building the world that we want, a world that treats everybody with the love, care, and compassion that they so deserve. We can do this. Little by little, we can do this. Yes. If there are any anti-racist projects that you are working on, big or small, or even things that you're imagining, problems that you can see, but you're not too sure how to formulate the solution and become intentional with your actions, I want you to message me because I also made a birthday goal for myself. Yes, I know my birthday was May 6th and I'm still celebrating and y'all can't stop me. So I made a birthday wish for myself. I'm going to support 100 anti-racist projects, big or small. I don't care what they are. But I'm going to use this platform of the Institute to support people to do this work. And in order for us to know that we're actually attaining that goal, we need to start coming and saying, this is what we're working on. Be courageous. This is what we're working on. And I will do everything that I can in my power to support. There will be a documentation of it. I will make that public soon. But I do want folks to send me messages with the work that they're doing, the ways that they think that I can help. I'm willing to use any of my network to do things, including these kinds of things. I'll go live. I'll talk about anything. You know how I roll. Okay, folks. Listen, have a good one. Thank you again, Marjorie. Love you lots. Big hugs to everybody. Let's go build an anti-racist world, my friend. Yeah. Bye.